Thank you for joining us for our next episode of our small group study. Today we're going to be talking about the book of Joshua. And so, Chad, would you go ahead and start reading for us?
Yeah, chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place the sole of your foot will tread upon I will give to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.
All right, so one of the things that is striking about the book of Joshua is when we consider it is in the context that it is in, and we take into that the patterns that have been established previously. We see some interesting things. And so, first of all, we look at the context. The context is that God has called a people to himself. He has turned that people into a nation in Egypt. He has saved them from the tyranny of Egypt, brought them out into the wilderness, where he has made a covenant with them, given them the law, given them the guidance on how to appropriately worship him. And now he's going to take them into the promised land. So that's the overall context. They're at the point now where after 40 years in the wilderness due to unfaithfulness, they're now ready to conquer the land. When you look at that context and then you look at patterns that are established, especially in the book of Genesis, and then again in the book of Exodus, you see some interesting parallels. And one of those parallels here is you have, at the very beginning, they're going to cross water into the promised land, so to speak. So what's happening with these patterns, and why are they established and then repeated so often? And particularly, what do you see in the pattern here of crossing over the water into the dry land?
So in this case, they're crossing the Jordan. And if we go back, they crossed the Red Sea. And if we go back to Genesis, I guess the Spirit hovered over the waters, right, and things of this sort. So, but obviously we have this, kind of a crossing of the water before the creation in Genesis, or the creation of a people here in this case. But obviously, it's very reminiscent of baptism in the life of the believer.
Right. Right. So one of the things that's really fascinating about this is these patterns are established, and they're very repetitive, even though we don't notice them usually when we're reading Scripture. So you do have this Spirit hovering over the waters before dry land is created in Genesis, and then when dry land is created, it's created by separating it from the water. You have the going across the Red Sea for the people of Israel, and now you have the crossing over the Jordan, and as you pointed out, you have baptism for the believer. And all of these things have to do with some very interesting themes in the Bible. One of those themes is the theme of birth, or in this case, rebirth. When anybody is born or reborn in the Bible, that happens as they come through water. Now, obviously, there's a parallel there to actual physical birth, but there's also a parallel here from the symbolism of what water represents itself. Water is a picture of possibility and chaos. And dry land is a picture of a reality being brought out of that, some boundaries, that there's in some ways there's a rejection of all the possibilities except for a certain one. So why do you think that is so important, that it happens so often in Scripture? What are we as Christians to learn from that or understand from that?
I think we're supposed to get that it's pretty foundational. If you look at baptism, it's death of the old life and birth of the new, and it's kind of the exclusion of the way you used to live
Right.
to the way that God has commanded, and obviously the same thing here. As you said, it's kind of they've come from Egypt, they've spent 40 years in the wilderness. They haven't exactly been the picture of faithfulness and stuff like that, and God is saying, we're starting over, we're starting new, and out of all the possibilities, I've given you a prescription for success.
Yeah, it's really interesting that the Bible's take on creation is that creation is a choice of separating yourself, choosing what you're not going to be. And it's the reason that's interesting is because in our modern world, keeping your options open, not excluding yourself from anything, having it all, is what we look at as kind of the way to a good existence. But the Bible is very clear that that's not actually the way it is. You have to choose the things you are not going to be. What are you going to exclude yourself from in order to become something new? And so you have this again, and so the people, there's an element of having to exclude themselves from their past, from the idolatry, from the disobedience, from all those things that have occurred before, especially coming from the wilderness where the previous generation didn't get to enter into the promised land because they didn't have faith. Excluding or separating themselves from all of that stuff in their past to become something new is a really important theme here. One of the other things that's really interesting here is that you have Joshua becoming kind of a new Moses and leading his people the way that Moses did. Now, why is it so important that the Bible draws this connection here between Joshua and Moses, and what's the importance of both of these characters as far as the people of God are concerned?
I don't know.
Okay, that's a great answer. I think that one of the aspects of it, at the very least, we could say, is that there's an importance to the idea of leadership here, and from a theological perspective, leadership is much different than it is from a worldly perspective. So in your mind, what would you say are some of the big contrasts between biblical leadership and worldly leadership?
Worldly leadership, obviously, we kind of look at, especially right now, politicians, no matter what side of the aisle, are kind of not the most popular people right now, and they're looked at as people who take advantage of the power that they wield and things of this sort. But obviously, the biblical model is that you are a servant of the people, and that God's blessing comes through you to those people, and it's a great responsibility.
Yeah, I think that it's really clear that as the Bible puts these leaders in front of us, it's very clear that they're in some sense representing God, and not from some kind of weird egomaniac kind of way, which we have to make that distinction in our modern time, but from the standpoint of we were made in God's image, and anytime you gain authority from a biblical perspective, then you're to use that authority from the standpoint of what would God want you to do with this. How would God, what is a reflection of God? What is, I guess we could say that leadership in a biblical perspective is to be in the image of God, giving of self to glorify what's in your area of expertise or your area of responsibility, your area of authority, because that's what God does. It's interesting that God creates the world and glorifies it and does all that kind of stuff. And then what's really important is when God makes man, he says, you're going to be made in my image. You're a small picture of me, and you're going to get the opportunity to do that as well. You're going to get the opportunity to glorify. You're going to get the opportunity to love something into being glorious, and that's going to require sacrifice. That's going to require work. That's going to require all those things. And if you've ever had any kind of a leadership position and didn't really just royally mess it up, that that's the way that it works. I mean, even just being a parent, there's nothing that really prepares you for that. There's nothing that prepares you for the sacrifice that's really required And there really isn't a limit to how much you can sacrifice. Right? And that's the thing that's really difficult as a parent, because when your kids leave the house, then you say, well, why could I have sacrificed more, and could things have been better? And the answer is always yes. But that's really fundamental to the story here, is that we're looking at a people who are going to bear the image of God to the world, but then we look at an individual to get even a sharper focus about, well, what is that exactly supposed to look like? And we see that first in Moses, then in Joshua.